to introduce the fact that water is not the only life support system at risk in producing natural gas. Air quality is also at risk. Up until 3 years ago, air quality got little attention in the gas fields. Little consideration had been given to the amount of diesel that is burned to produce natural gas. When you add up the exhaust from the labor force's diesel trucks and the corporate trucks and huge machinery needed to extract the gas, the exhaust begins to reach very high levels that contain NOx, nitrogen oxides, as well as volatile organic compounds, for short called VOCs. When the nitrogen oxide, the NOxes and the VOCs float up into the air in presence of sunlight, they produce what is called ground-level ozone. It is now apparent that stationary and mobile equipment required to produce and deliver natural gas can cause an urban-like smog problem rich in ozone, and especially in areas of high production. We need ozone in the stratosphere to protect us from the ultraviolet light, but at ground level, it poses a serious threat to all animals, including humans, and plants, including the trees in our forests. 1 molecule of ozone can burn a hole in the deep alveolar tissue in your lungs. It is well documented that daily exposure to ozone leads to early aging of the lungs. They become brittle and dry out. The lungs cannot repair this kind of damage. Every exposure incident builds upon the damage that was already there. Chronic ozone exposure can cause asthma, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other pulmonary disorders. Children are especially vulnerable because their lungs continue to grow and enlarge until about age 18. As they mature in the presence of ozone, their alveoli production is reduced, and they end up with brittle lungs like those of an 80-year-old. Ozone was always thought to be only an urban problem caused by the exhaust from gasoline combustion in automobiles, the NOxes, and the volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, from the gasoline fumes. The same VOCs that are released from natural gas operations. We now have in the West an urban air pollution phenomenon that no one suspected would happen. Now, we came upon this fracking operation while we were looking for the tunnel that had been drilled through a mountain to reduce the long trip to a county road. There are already 8 completed wells on this pad, if you look to the left and below the pad. You can see the 8 condensate water holding tanks, or produced water tanks. There are actually 35 green fracking tanks, each about the size of a train car, nested side by side to the left of the pad. 35 more along the back, and zooming in on it at our office, we counted almost 100 tanks on this pad. You can see the white cabs of at least 8 generator and chemical mixing trucks lined up near the hole where all the activity is taking place. Now, processing. When the gas first comes from the ground, the water must be stripped off, as well as other gases like pentane, propane, and the noxious gases that include benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, called the BTEXs. So before the natural gas, or methane, moves into the local delivery pipe system, it has to be dried and cleaned up a little. Here is a pad where drilling has ceased, and the wells are now set up to produce gas, perhaps for another 25 years. There are 5 wells on this pad. See the shadow to the left of the picture? That is one of the interesting looking contraptions called Christmas trees in the foreground. That is where the gas comes up from the ground from each well on the pad. To the right, you can see a solar panel that monitors the air temperature, and when it gets near freezing, it releases methanol, or wood alcohol. From that white tank in the gas, right into the gas coming out of the ground to prevent the pipes from freezing. Now, this is a very important safety factor. To the left and to the back, you can see the separator unit with 5 glycol dehydrators. Now, as the gas comes up out of the ground, it is passed through a liquid in the separator column called ethylene glycol. When that ethylene glycol gets saturated with water, then it is heated, and the water is evaporated off to condense into the tanks that I will show you in a minute. Those noxious gases I mentioned, such as BTEX, and I'll mention them once more, benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and xylene, are allowed to vent off here. The orange arrow points at a pipe for flaring off those gases when the pressure gets high enough. And it is important to keep in mind that throughout all the processes you have seen so far, a great deal of natural gas is escaping as well. And natural gas, or methane, is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Now, here are the 5 holding tanks. Sorry, the way we took this picture, you cannot see all of them. These tanks are supposed to be bermed so that if 75% of the fluid in the tank were to leak, all of it would be contained on the site. And for the life of this pad, as long as it keeps producing gas, water trucks will have to come and haul off the condensate. Now, what you see on this pad is called stationary equipment. The vehicles that service stationary units are referred to as mobile equipment. And air pollution comes now from both stationary and mobile sources. This is a compressor unit, one of many needed along pipelines to keep the gas at a high enough pressure so that there is no backflow from the main delivery lines. Here you see 2 separate columns and no holding tanks. Since no one could be found here to talk with, we can only speculate that this is one of the new units where produced water is being stored in an underground tank, or perhaps being piped to a deep well injection site that was recently built in this area. In order to get the gas from the primary delivery system into the large long-distance system that is run at 400 pounds per square inch, this unit has to be producing at 500 pounds per square inch. The generators moving those huge fans are located inside the building, and they are producing NOx, the nitrogen oxides, and high levels of BTEX and other heavy volatiles. There is technology available today to build these as closed systems, capturing as much as 95% of the VOCs that would come off. The original capital outlay is a little high, but for the amount of gas that the new systems capture, the new units are paying off in 3 to 5 years. Gas has to be polished once more before it enters the interstate commercial delivery lines. Here you see a picture of a refinery in southwestern Colorado that releases huge volumes of foul-smelling nitrogen and sulfur-based volatile compounds. Because gas production is so high in this region of the state, British Petroleum built another refinery just up the road several miles, which we could not see from the road while we were there. This plant takes water out of the local river to wash the gas after the noxious substances have been removed. So in your planning, you need to take into consideration where a unit like this will be needed. Your organizations should be alert and watch for notices of intent to build one of these units in your area. And for economic purposes, they will most likely be built near a major pipeline. Waste fluids and sludge are handled in a number of ways. The following pictures are shown only to demonstrate that huge volumes of water must be dealt with in the production of natural gas. And in the West, we can count on evaporation. In the more humid areas of the country, that will not work. This is the evaporation pit for the wash water from the refinery I just showed you. Note the cannon-like apparatus shooting the water into the air to assist evaporation. And note how the berm around this pond is beginning to erode. Pits like this service large numbers of wells, usually for one operator. Look closely and you should be able to see the red cab on the water truck unloading. A unit like this is another source for the release of nitrogen oxides, diesel, and VOCs. We could see no netting over these pits. This facility accepted truckloads of fluids from small developers and wildcatters from a radius of about 50 miles or more. No sampling or accounting for the chemicals in the incoming fluids took place at this unit or any other disposable units that we looked into. When the pits dry out and become sludge, the residue is then land farmed. It is disked into the soil and supposed to be biodegradable. However, the biocides used during drilling and fracking would undoubtedly make the land incapable of producing much vegetation and certainly allow no biodegradation. Quite a few of the products on our Colorado list contain silica, which when it dries will readily blow about as dust. Silica dust can cause silicosis, a serious lung disorder that can lead to a rapid and lethal form of lung cancer. And also, fine dust particles increase the smog or haze effect of ozone. In 2003, the highly respected nationwide oil and gas watchdog organization, OGAP, asked us about the health effects of the chemicals used in gas operations and started sending us lots of material safety data sheets, the MSDS sheets, that are attached to products that contain hazardous chemicals. That was when one of our staff and a pre-doctoral student from MIT on a National Science Foundation grant working with us for the summer set out to systematically set up a database in order to look at the long list of chemicals that we had at hand. As they began to look closely at the health effects, a consistent pattern or profile of the health categories kept popping up based on 14 traditional toxicological categories used in government publications. The last time this program was updated for Colorado alone, there were 246 products and 278 chemicals on our list. 93% of the 246 products had identifiable health effects. The other 7% represent the products for which we had limited information because the ingredients were listed as either proprietary or the names were too general or no ingredients were listed. And 5 of the products on this list had no ingredient information at all. Of those products that had health effects, 14% had 1 to 3 effects and 86% had 4 to 14 effects. And what surprised us was to find that 43% of the products on our list contain endocrine disruptors, chemicals that can interfere with the development of individuals before they are born and cause irreversible lifetime changes in their health and how they function later in life. Wildlife, starting at the lowest level in the food web, has proven to be sensitive to chemicals of this nature at ambient, or what we call environmental concentrations. We then looked at the chemicals based on their major pathway exposure. Were they soluble? Could they evaporate? And we were able to identify 63% of the 278 chemicals on our list using what are called CAS numbers, the American Chemical Society's Chemical Abstract System. The CAS number made it possible to specifically search the literature for the health effects of these chemicals. And we created the following bar graphs based on the results of literature searches. Looking at the water-soluble chemicals alone, this is the health profile they produced. The bars tell you how often a certain health category is associated with all of the chemicals on the list. In other words, if you look at the screen, you will see that approximately 95% of the chemicals on the list could irritate the eyes, the skin, and cause sensitization, in other words, trigger allergies. And remember, a chemical can have up to 14 health effects. And it turned out that those health categories or vital systems most associated with the chemicals, starting from left to right, are the skin, eye, and sensory organs that I just mentioned, respiratory tract, stomach, liver, the brain, and the nervous system. The adverse health effects expressed by those systems, in many cases, would occur shortly after exposure. These are conditions that may not often be brought to the attention of clinicians because they seem minor. Itching, burning skin, burning eyes, sore throats, nausea, headaches, sinusitis, flu-like symptoms, sensitization, fatigue, dizziness, mild tingling in the extremities that can lead to permanent nerve damage that is irreversible. Or if severe, the person would be brought to the emergency room first for treatment for direct exposure to burns on the skin, for example. The other health categories, continuing on from left to right, include ecological effects, cardiovascular and the heart, the immune system, other, that includes bone damage and death, the reproductive system, development, mutagenicity, cancer, and endocrine disorders. All health problems that would not be expressed immediately, but could turn up as chronic health problems months or years later. And they could never be traced directly to industrial exposure. And here you see the profile associated with the identifiable volatile compounds that is almost the same, but with greater frequency and more chemicals are linked with the chronic long-term disorders. It is important to point out here where cancer lies on the graph. This analysis reveals that 38% of the chemicals can cause cancer, compared to 78% of the chemicals that can cause brain and nervous system damage. Maybe we should be more interested in these other health effects to the left when determining the health risks caused by the chemicals used in this industry. This is a picture of one of the corporate 400-bed man camps to house the gas field workers to make sure they have enough people to work around the clock. Men are being flown into Colorado from Canada to work for 4 weeks, 12 hours on and 12 hours off around the clock, and never leave the gas patch until they fly back to Canada for 2 weeks